I'll spend a few minutes and we'll keep it really high level and try and keep it a bit peppy and buzzy because it's just before lunch. Why Microsoft in the cloud and what are people doing in the cloud today, specifically in the context of our public cloud. Why trust us in the cloud? Tons of reasons, but we'll pick a few. And what is Azure, which we've kind of touched on already, but we'll get into a bit more detail. So don't panic. I'm not gonna stop for minutes on each block behind me, but I want to spend a few seconds just talking about why people are making that transition to the cloud, specifically in the context of public clouds. What we're talking about is infrastructure as a service. So for those of you with server rooms, which most of you will have, some of you will be perhaps have a broom closet somewhere with a fan in it and a server there, or there's a server on the Susie's desk you file and print. What we're talking about Azure is lifting that server infrastructure, that back office infrastructure you have today, into the cloud, and a few other things. So that's the context of which we're referring to. So Office 365 is software as a service. It's an end product of something that we've got on Azure today. So what we're talking about is you guys lifting and shifting your existing infrastructure into the cloud. So let's look back 5 years when there was all that buzz around virtualization. We're kind of, this is the next iteration. This is the next step forward. So we're no longer pooling our resources and pooling the multiple servers we have on site into a single box, or consolidating them onto a few different boxes on site. Let's now lift and shift those into Windows Azure. Let's move to a model where you're no longer waiting a few days or a few weeks for a physical server to arrive from distribution, then through SOL-TEC. Let's move to a model where you can ring your help desk at SOL-TEC, and the depots at their fingertips. They can spin up a virtual machine for you in the cloud within a matter of minutes, quicker than they could ring distribution, place an order on distribution, and then if you're really lucky, within 24 hours have some physical kit arrive on site and someone from SOL-TEC to come and set it all up. So the cloud is all about moving to a model where it's IT on demand. It's IT on demand from a provisioning what you need that's new, but it's also moving to a model where you're no longer building out your physical infrastructure to cope with the demand of, that 1 week a year. If you were UCAS, they use Windows Azure. The people that place students with university places and courses, so they leverage Windows Azure. Their business is so seasonal that they can narrow it down to just a week a year, where they receive, 500,000 students trying to interact with their IP and their databases and their portal to figure out what's going on, and then everything kind of dips back down to a static, fairly standard level. So in days of old, they were physically building out their infrastructure to cope with that demand for that 1 week a year. Windows Azure is all about, or Microsoft Azure, and the services that SOL-TEC kind of turned it into for you guys, is all about moving to a model where you're only paying for what you use, and your IT is scaling up and scaling down to cope with your demand, whether that's your website, an internal SQL database that you perhaps use in accounts for running payroll once a quarter. Hope you're paying people more than once a quarter, but that's the analogy we'll go with. So let's lift and shift that into Azure. Let's move to a model where you're no longer paying for renting that physical space in the office where that server is, paying to cool it, to maintain that server, having SOL-TEC or yourselves come on site to continually maintain that box. Every 3 years, replacing that physical server because it comes to end of life and everyone's telling you need a new box. Let's move to a model where your IT is continuously up to date, and it's there when you need it, and when you don't need it, you're not paying to use it. So that's what the cloud's all about. And Windows Azure has been around in its current guise since 2010. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. Let's actually spend a few more seconds talking about the various verticals used in Azure. So it's often a misconception that the cloud is for enterprise. And we've done really well in the last 4 years at getting 50% of the Fortune 500 to consume some services or some form of services on our cloud. But we've got everyone from startup festivals building their website on Azure, micro SMBs with a handful of employees, wanting a scalable website on Azure for that, touch wood for them, that moment where there's 10,000 kids trying to buy tickets to their festival, wherever it may be. To that analogy we spoke about earlier about moving a specific workload. It might be a server that you use, once a quarter or sporadically into the cloud. To UCAS, which we reference. We've got schools and governments and the NHS, for example, for legislative reasons, they've got to host and store CAT scan and MRI data for 10 years. For 10 years, right? And can you imagine the amount of CAT scan and MRI data there is across the entirety of the NHS? So being able to lift and shift that into Azure, pay a monthly fee for having it there, and being able to access that data when they need it, but no longer having to worry about having someone come on site, put that stuff on tape, making sure it's safe where it is, and all the hassle and costs that come with physical infrastructure. The cloud eliminates all of that. So it's all about making all of your lives easier whilst transitioning skills you have and familiarities you have with Microsoft technology today. So why trust us in the cloud? So those are, the last slide's all about why people are making that move to the cloud. And we're not the only cloud. There are some other clouds out there, which I won't name, but kind of ends like Google, and there's another one where you do lots of your online shopping on. It's Amazon, AWS. But why trust us? Why trust Microsoft in the cloud? Well, we've been delivering services at internet scale since 1989. Everyone in this room uses Azure today. That's a bold statement, but I'm fairly confident. Whether it be Hotmail, MSN, which launched in 1995, to Xbox Live, that's hosted on Azure. The Office 365 infrastructure, that's hosted on Azure. We've invested over, it's a little bit blurry, but $2.3 billion into our network of data centers across the globe. We own 8 data centers today, 15 through co-location partnerships. So for those of you who've got offices in far-flung places where we perhaps don't own the bricks and mortar of a physical DC, we've got co-lo partnerships to be able to provision services to those areas. Co-location partnerships is what I mean by co-lo partnerships. From a platform and security perspective, everyone is sick and tired of hearing about 999 uptime. Every single cloud provider is promising some near 100% level of uptime. Actually, with Windows Azure, there are some unique selling points. So our SLA for storage, for example, for data that you back up into Azure, is a 999 promise, but on a monthly basis. So some of our biggest competitors, like Amazon and Google, offer a similar SLA, but on a yearly basis. So your guaranteed uptime with Azure, with us, is hours more over the course of the year versus some of those competitors we mentioned. We spoke about the geo distribution, but you guys always have the option when dealing with SOL-TEC and they're building that new infrastructure for you in the cloud to select which region you want that data to be held. So for all of you in the UK, the local DC is Ireland, which we call Western Europe in Azure terms. You've got Amsterdam, if you're that way inclined. Perhaps you want to back up your data into Dublin and have a replica of that data in Amsterdam in case the Russians decided to invade Ireland for any reason. You never know, right? So they seem to be on that path. So from a compliance and DR perspective, it's turning into comedy hour. I didn't mean for it to go this way. From a compliance and DR perspective, the list of legislative demands and EU data directives that we meet and help you guys meet by moving your data into Azure is as long as my arm. And if any one of you want to have a discussion separately, one-to-one, SOL-TEC can coordinate that, and we can sit down and have discussions with you and your teams and the respective people within your businesses to put any of those concerns to ease. Legislation is on our side, it's on your side. You can move your data to the cloud in most cases. So what's notable and worth mentioning? So from a PCI and DSS perspective, we got there before Amazon. In January, we received accreditation for hosting transactional data in the cloud. We spoke about impact level 2 and the fact that we've got all types of sectors consuming services within Azure, so not just corporate commercial. If you're public sector in the room here, it's a viable option for you as well. I'll move on just because I'm conscious of time. So we're not asking you to make a leap of faith that we have not already made. So within SOL-TEC, they leverage Office 365, and they're asking everyone here to buy Office 365. We're not asking you to reach out to SOL-TEC and consume services within our public cloud without us using it ourselves. So we host over 200 applications in the cloud, many of which are public-facing SaaS applications that everyone within this room consumes or interacts with. So from Skype through to Bing to Xbox Live and many others. I mentioned it earlier, but this isn't delivering services via the cloud, which is such a buzzword, isn't new to us. We've been doing it since '89, since MSN Messenger in the early 2000s and even before that. But in Azure's current guise, since 2010, since the platform was officially launched. We've processed over 200 billion Active Directory authentications within the cloud. There's over trillions of objects stored within Azure storage in the cloud. So although we're asking you to kind of take a leap of faith and try something new, we're not asking you to be early adopters of technology that isn't ready. It's totally ready. It's ready to be consumed. And any of you that use any of these services and are used to the resilience and the availability of any of these services will know that, it's rare that you log into your Hotmail, your Outlook account, and the service is down. Just going to spend a second on this. Just for those of you that aren't aware, this is what the Microsoft data center looks like. To put the scale of our operation into perspective, you've got your local. It's not only about moving to the cloud and having IT that's elastic, that you're paying for, and all the other good commercial reasons that we spoke about. Let's focus on the fact that you can operate your internal infrastructure alongside your biggest competitors. 50% of the Fortune 500 have their data and various services within Azure. You can operate your website, you can have it scale and have it cope with the demand of the likes of Domino's, if anyone in this room has a little pizzeria that they run. So the cloud isn't only about the good commercial reasons about why you should adopt it. You can also look at it from the perspective of, I can now have my IT be as resilient, as available, as reliable as that of Barclays through to that startup mortgage advisor around the corner. We don't differentiate. So a Microsoft data center. So let's pick the Chicago DC, the Chicago data center. We've got roughly 200,000 computers hosting 1 million virtual servers manned by 12 guys and a bunch of robots. It is very, very mechanized. The people who have access to the physical racks within these containers don't have a clue and will never know what data they're interacting with. And the people who interact with data remotely for servicing reasons are never allowed on the physical floor. So actually moving your data into the cloud, you're increasing your availability, the resilience, and actually it's more secure. It's less likely that the cleaner is going to be kind of hoovering up the server room and accidentally kick a cable down or accidentally flick the switch and turn off the air conditioning unit and the building goes up in flames. That isn't going to happen in a Microsoft data center. Touch wood, touch wood. It isn't going to happen.
Did people ever fall out of those top doors?
Yeah. Yeah. So what's the taxonomy of the cloud look like today? I mean, it gets really, really confusing. What's all this cloud stuff? And forgive me if I'm teaching you to suck eggs, and we covered this earlier in the seminar. I wasn't in from the start. But today you've got your physical servers on site. A couple of years ago, this was a big hot topic. Let's virtualize and consolidate your infrastructure onto bigger boxes with more processing power on site. Now let's lift and shift those virtualized machines into Azure, into infrastructure as a service. For any developers in the room, we don't differentiate, and a unique selling point within Azure is that infrastructure and platform as a service, where we support more than just the OS and the bare metal. And it's for developing applications to then offer as an end SaaS solution. So that's what the taxonomy of the cloud looks like today. So where does Azure sit? Azure is infrastructure and platform as a service. And if there's anyone within here who wants to offer an app, for example, to your sales teams, like if you ran an estate agents and you wanted to build an app through SOL-TEC on Azure Platform as a Service to then make available to your teams on their iPads as software as a service. So it isn't as confusing and mystic as it all seems. They're all very much tied together. And one thing I forgot to mention earlier was, unlike with many of our competitors, when you lift and shift infrastructure into Azure today, so you take a server on site, SOL-TEC virtualize it and do all the magic stuff in the background, put it into Azure, and you decide, actually this isn't for me. You can port your VMs back down from the cloud, your virtual machines back down from the cloud with no problem, right? Because this is Microsoft's cloud. You're continuing to leverage technologies you're familiar with today. We're not asking you to take a leap of faith and play around with clouds like Google and Amazon, where perhaps it's a bit more difficult to bring your data and your servers and your infrastructure back down. So you could have a virtual machine in the cloud for an hour. Perhaps you want to move your web server into the cloud because your marketing team's launching a big campaign and you expect thousands of visitors. So move it into Azure for an afternoon and then move it back down. There's obviously a cost associated to all of that, but it's all very achievable. So you're not losing your data to the cloud forever. So what is Azure? what's this Azure thing he keeps talking about? Well, first and foremost, it's a public cloud. So it's not Microsoft centric. You could go to SOL-TEC for anyone who uses Oracle for database instead of SQL. Well, SOL-TEC can back up your Oracle databases into Azure. Anyone use Linux in the room? Great, because we can spin up Linux, Swiss, Ubuntu, open source server technology right next to your Windows VM in the cloud. So we're not limiting you to just Microsoft technologies. It is a genuine public cloud, except take into account the fact that 2 out of 3 server operating systems globally today, so 2 out of 3 server operating systems today run Windows OS. Who is better placed to manage that OS and the bare metal on your behalf? Us. And then SOL-TEC will make the service consumable. So we split Azure out into all these raw building blocks. Remember we spoke about earlier, Azure is an empty server room in the cloud, and SOL-TEC will turn it into consumable IT. So have a chat with SOL-TEC about all these various bits. We won't get into all of it now because it's not relevant. But most of what you can do on site today, you can lift and shift into Azure. And what are like-minded businesses of a similar size doing within Azure today? What can each of you take away from this session and go and harass your SOL-TEC sales guy about tomorrow? Well, go and ask them about backup in the cloud. So anyone who's still running Windows Server 2003, does anyone still run Server 2003? SBS? No? Well, 50% of the UK customer base are still running these out-of-date server technologies. We're bringing them to end of life, so if you are, be conscious of the fact that you need to do something soon. Why not spin up that new VM, the new server in the cloud? So that's kind of more here. Or move existing line of business applications you have today into VMs in the cloud, right? Data backup, all of the latest server technology have connectors built in for seamless backup into the cloud. For those of you with more sophisticated backup and disaster recovery needs and storage needs, again, a lot of that's achievable within the cloud. So raise it with SOL-TEC. And Windows Azure Active Directory. This is a really, really fun topic to talk about because, again, we're not the only players in cloud. You've got other options. It's not just Office 365. And there are other line of business applications that you consume via the cloud, like Sage have cloud, Salesforce is in the cloud. Maybe your marketing departments interact with various blog sites and Twitter and Facebook. So Windows Azure Active Directory enables you to achieve single sign-on across 1,000 of the most commonly used line of business applications in the cloud today. So software as a service type applications. It enables you to offer single sign-on for your users across all of those apps, which is really powerful. So you're no longer faffing about. So we're moving more and more towards a path, over the next few years where I think I read a statistic somewhere where 80% of business applications will be consumed via the internet, via the cloud, via SaaS. It's all the same thing. How are you going to manage identity and access? Speak to SOL-TEC about it because it's a hot topic. So, last but not least, I wasn't going to get into this unless someone asked, but I'm going to do it now anyways. Because I think he's left now, but my colleague who was up here before me talking about Office 365 mentioned privacy and data. So the NSA and Edward Snowden has caused all kinds of fears. Many of you probably remember 2E2 going bust. There's all kinds of reasons why people have started to maybe adapt the cloud a bit. So don't worry. From a security perspective, we've to date never given organizational data or opened any backdoors to the NSA. It just doesn't happen, right? I'm sure it's probably happened from an individual standpoint, like maybe someone's Hotmail account because they're sending emails about all kinds of weird stuff, and it needs to be looked at. And again, that's built into their terms and conditions when they sign up. But from your data, from corporate data in our DCs, we've never opened up or given governments access to organizational data directly. So how that happens, if for some reason one of you cracked the recipe to McDonald's, Big Mac sauce, and the NSA decided that we need to find out because we like Big Macs too, governments need to raise mutual legal assistance treaties. It's a bilateral agreement between governments. So your DC, let's say you chose Dublin, it's United States government will raise a request with the Irish government, and then you would be subpoenaed to forfeit the data and have your opportunity to argue different. So there are no backdoors, right? So I know the media's there's lots of hype in the market today around are there backdoors or all around Edward Snowden and the NSA. Just don't worry about it. And again, if you want to have a chat separately and want to talk about it in much more detail, totally possible. We can arrange that through SOL-TEC. So if there's no questions around that, we'll move on. I guess last but not least, we mentioned it earlier, Azure has been used by the masses today. Here's just a couple logos of a small minority of our customers consuming services within the Azure network of data centers. I guess if I could leave you with one point is how we think about kind of these hot topics, these easy workloads and easy tasks that you can move into the cloud today and can move into the cloud fairly quickly. Have a think about which is applicable to your business and raise a discussion with SOL-TEC, because cloud is the future. Now's a great time to do it. The prices for cloud aren't going to go up, they're going down. We're reducing our prices month on month. We're about to reduce our prices for virtual machines, virtual servers in the cloud by 20% next month. We're reducing our prices for storage by 65% next month. As our economies of scale grow, we're feeding that down to our customers. So for those of you who use Azure today, thank you very much. For all of you who don't, and will soon, we look forward to calling you an Azure customer, but thank you very much for your time.